Smooth was good, baby.
Ain't even let me run this shit. I'll make it like look real good. I'll make the West look real good. I came in a function burnt out with a broken wrist. For 10K you'll get filled with hollow tips. Rocky Balboa tell a nigga to box this stick. You'll be dead if you come between rock and red. Home run with this plastic, turn a nigga to bobbleheads. Tommy Pickles, Tommy Hilfiger, man, I hate niggas. Wearing my clothes and imitate niggas be knockoff. I brought all my trophies to the room, my shoes cost. I got Caden in the booth with me. Watch your mouth, bitch. Caught him talking down on the team, he got drop kicked with a chopstick in the mosh pit. Wildin' out, Willie Beams on the mop stick. Socks and shoes and grimy. Shit, you know what's going on. You know the truth. 300 jury and above. You already know it's with me. Pull up NASCAR, I'm a speeder. I don't need her. Don't ask to play ball with me. I'm Derek Jeter. Crushing snakes in my bathing apes. Got jungle fever. I just put 5 ounces in the 1 liter. Don't ask how much my jury costs. I hate dumb people. You don't know who shot your friend. We don't either. I could do a song with whoever I want. I'm from LA, so I stay with a gun. Niggas better watch their mouth when talking to me crazy. You don't know my homies shoot up babies. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. You wanna fuck me, bitch, you won't pay me. I got 3 Ks, I've been Ku Klux lately. My homies is crazy that shoot at babies. I've been driving whips out the DuPont lately.
All right, my music not playing tonight for some reason. Anyway, we Japanese still. You getting cooked in front of your family? Like a Japanese meal. As y'all shoot the hibachi and none of you niggas can stop me, but can't help but watch me. All right, man, as promised, man, the brother wanted me to go into the EV13 and break that down. So I'm going to provide you guys some sources. You're going to be going to Wikipedia. I got a scientific article I want to go to, break that down, and just deal with the demography of EV13. When it comes to EV13, EV13 is a very particular case, put it like that. And when you're looking at scientific literature on it, it seems like there is material written about EV13, but they try to make it mysterious because there are YAP markers, I guess. You hear certain people say, oh, I don't know how EV13 got to the Balkans. It's pretty simple. They migrated there. So it's just a story of demography, a story of migration. Shout out to my YAP carriers, whether you E1, B1B, E1A, EM44, EM123. We got love for all the YAP gang, YAP members, YAP carriers throughout the world, no matter what your cultural backdrop is, ideology, skin tone, phenotype. It don't matter. You from the family. You family. You understand? You are descendant of YAP. You are descendant of DE. We all connected. Whether you in Japan, Afghanistan, African, Europe, whatever. You are the people. When the people is YAP. You know what I'm saying? So today we're going to be dealing with EV13 and its phylogeny. Okay? So with that being said, let's go straight to Wikipedia and show the tree. And break this down. Someone else requested to do a history of the Greek, pretty much the Greek phylogeny. And, this actually touches on that. because the EV13 is thought to be, a part of that original expansion of Hellenes and Greeks and whatnot. So we're going to touch on that a little bit here. With that being said, let's get right into today's topic. Upedia. All right, so Upedia or EUpedia, however you guys want to pronounce that, under the E1B1B tab, under the haplogroups and genetics. There's a whole section plotted out for V13, so we're gonna read that thing in its entirety. And I also want to go to the tree here, just to show you the line of descent. So E1B1B starts with M215. And it says it starts in the Paleolithic Red Sea region, which is very interesting. Meaning E1B1 would have to be somewhere around that region in order for it to produce descendants to carry M215. That's also the father of the E1B1A clade. It says here it breaks off into M35 and M281. And then we're concerned about V13, which is down here. M35 then breaks out to L539, which produces M78. The M78 is Z1919, and you can see it's Mediterranean. This branch is Mediterranean, goes down to L618, and then produces V13, or CTS5856. And it's saying that it's in Europe. So, again, it's a very, very unique clade, a clade that has a very unique history, and that's explored tonight. So shout out to all my Yap gang members. Yap. So we're gonna go straight to the meat and potatoes here, EV13. And here's a distribution map of the haplogroup EV13 in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. You can see here. Southern Europe, they have a great prevalence here. They're very pervasive here, 40 to 50%, 30 to 40%. And this is why people theorize that these groups of carriers could have been involved in the Greek expansion. As you can see, this around the Mediterranean and around the Aegean. It's where you see most of its representation, right? That's how they argue that, right? As you can see, it's very widespread into Europe. It's in the Middle East. It's in Turkey. It's in the Levant. It's in North Africa. It's in Spain, as expected, right? So now, then it gives you the many branches of EV13. BY6550 is in Germany, Scotland. Z1057 branches off into a major family, and you can see that it just keeps branching. This looks to me like rapid radiation, because it starts in the Chalcolithic. They estimate it starting in the Chalcolithic. That's the Copper Age, and as you can see, it starts to split in the early Bronze Age, and then it just starts spitting out clades. In between the Middle Bronze Age and the Bronze Age, you see all these clades coming into fruition and popping up on the Earth, right? Late Iron Age, Classic Antiquity. To see it still continue to split and continue to split. So this happened in a very short time, where they start spitting out these people, meaning that these people were migrating, these people were multiplying and radiating, right? You can see they got clades in Poland, Slovakia, Italy, Greece, England, Lebanon, Sweden, Belgium. They got clades in Wales, Germany, Qatar. We have Britain, Ireland, Ireland, and Germany, Czechia, Sweden. I see Italy, Croatia, Hungary, Albania, Norway. So you can see that this clade is widespread. Lithuania, Germany, Spain, Tunisia, Russia, Macedonia, Bosnia, England. It's very Saudi Arabia is very diverse and spread out, as you can see. Switzerland, Italy, and Montenegro. Origins and history Assimilation of Neolithic European EV13 by the Indo-Europeans. For many years, the vast majority of academics have assumed that EV13 and other E1B1B clades lineages came to the Balkans from the southern Levant via Anatolia during the Neolithic, and that the high frequency of EV13 was caused by a founder effect among the colonizers. This theory has it that E1B1B people were associated with the development of Neolithic lifestyle and the advent in agriculture and the Fertile Crescent in its earliest diffusion to Southeast Europe, the Thessalian Neolithic, and Mediterranean Europe, the Carnium pottery culture. So can we say Yap? Yap, because Yap is known for sowing the seeds of civilization, which is agrarian or agriculture, right? The testing of ancient DNA from the Natufian culture, Mesolithic Levant, and pre-pottery Neolithic Levant confirmed the high incidence of haplogroup E1B1B in that region. However, out of the 69 Y-DNA samples tested from Neolithic Europe, only 2 belong to that haplogroup. One EM78 from the Sopak culture in Hungary dating 5000 to 4800 BC, and another EM78 circa 5000 BC, possibly EV13 from northeast Spain and EL618 from Zemunica cave near Split in Croatia from 5500 BCE. Whether these EM78 samples came with the Neolithic farmers from the Near East or were already present among Mesolithic Europeans is unclear at present, but in any case, EV13 was definitely not the major Neolithic European lineage it was once alleged to be. Nowadays, EV13 is the only Mediterranean haplogroup consistently found throughout Europe, even in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Baltic countries, which are conspicuous by the absence of other Neolithic haplogroups like G2A, barring the Indo-European G2A Z1815, J1 and T, except in Estonia. However, since G2A is the only lineage that was consistently found in all Neolithic sites tested to date in Europe, the absence of Neolithic G2A lineages from Scandinavia and the Baltic implies that no Neolithic lineage survives there, and consequently, EV13 does not date from Neolithic in that region. In fact, it has been calculated that EV13 emerged from EM78 some 7,800 years ago when Neolithic farmers were advancing into the Balkans in the Danubian basin. Furthermore, all the modern members of EV13 descend from a common ancestor who lived approximately 5,500 years ago, and all of them also descend from a later common ancestor who carried the CTS5856 mutation. That ancestor would have lived about 4,100 years ago during the Bronze Age. Almost immediately afterwards, CTS5856 splits into 6 subclades, then branched off into even more subclades in the space of a few generations. In just a few centuries, that very minor EV13 lineage had started an expansion process that would turn it into one of Europe's most widespread paternal lineages and reach far beyond the borders of Europe itself, also spreading to the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, Kurdistan, Iran, and even Siberia. This data suggests that the fate of EV13 was linked to the elite dominance of Bronze Age society. The geographic distribution of the 6 main branches show that EV13 quickly spread to all parts of Europe, but was especially common in Central Europe. The only Bronze Age migration that could account for such a fast and far-reaching dispersal is that the Proto-Indo-Europeans. At present, the most consistent explanation is that EV13 developed from EM78 in Central or Eastern Europe during the Neolithic period and was assimilated by the R1A and R1B Proto-Indo-Europeans around the time that they were leaving the Pontic steppe to invade the rest of Europe. What is surprising with EV13 is that it is common in R1A dominant as in R1B dominant countries. R1A Indo-European tribes are associated with the Court of War culture, which span across Northeast Europe, Scandinavia, and the northern half of Central Europe. R1B tribes invaded the Balkans, the southern half of Central Europe, and joined up with Court of War people in what is now Germany, the Czech Republic, and Western Poland. If EV13 was found among both groups, it would have needed to be either assimilated in the Pontic steppe or very near from it, say in the Sututini Trypillian culture around Western Ukraine, Moldavia, and Romania, or at the junction between the two groups in Central Europe, for example, around the Czech Republic. The distribution and age of EV13 clades in Central and Western Europe are consistent with a dispersal by Hallstatt and Latine Celts, Italic tribes, including a Roman distribution, and the later influx of Germanic tribes, particularly the Goths, who may have assimilated additional Proto-Slavic EV13 lineages in East Germany, Poland, and Ukraine before entering the Roman Empire. See also the discussions was EV13, a major lineage of the Hallstatt Celts in Italics. And ancient East, West, and North Germanics had different DNA lineages. And this is why I always tell you guys, you can't judge people by skin color, geography, or any of those things. Okay? You can't. Because again, these people live in Europe. These people have been in Europe for thousands of years, but they go back to DE, they go back to Yap, they go back to Africans. Ultimately, they descend from Africans. Shout out to Albert Einstein. He's an E carrier, E1B1B carrier, and I believe his birthday was a few days ago. So shout out to him. So again, you can't go off phenotype, geography, language association, culture affiliation, religion. You can't go off those things and try to, plant a deep ancestry on people when you don't know their ancestry. The only way you can know their ancestry is do a DNA test, the field of genomics. It's the only way. That's what charts your DNA. That's what charts your ancestry. Your male line and your mother line, you need to know your mitochondrial DNA. You need to know your Y chromosome DNA. Autosomal just tell you who you mix with, right? So now, the Amorum et al. 2018 tested the ancient DNA from the 6th century Italy and Hungary and identified one EV13 in Coleno, Turin, who was autosomally fully Italian, not a Lombard and immigrant like many other samples tested. The eastern advance of the corded ware culture eventually gave rise to the Centasta culture in the Euro region, which is the ancestral culture of the Indo-Iranian branch of Indo-Europeans. EV13's presence in this culture would explain why modern Iranians and Kurds possess EV13, in addition to R1A, Z93, and R1B, Z2103. EV13 has been found as far as central Siberia near the Altai, a region also known to have been settled by Bronze Age Indo-Europeans. Due to the scarcity of full genomic sequences available from the Balkans, it is not yet clear when EV13 expanded in that region. The Indo-European migrations would certainly have brought some EV13 early on from circa 2500 BCE, but the history of the region is so complex that there might be many separate branches of EV13 that each came with a different invasion. For example, Iranic tribes, Latine Celts, Romans, Goths, and Slavs. The first Indo-European migration to Greece was that of the Mycenaeans from circa 1650 BCE. The Dorians from Central Europe followed from circa 1200 BCE. Both could have brought different subclades of EV13, and a founder effect of the phenomenon of elite dominance among the ruling invaders might have caused a fast growth of EV13 in the late Bronze Age and Iron Age Greece. There are at least three distinct sources of EV13 in Italy. The first would be the Bronze Age Italic tribes from Central Europe, who in all logic would have possessed at least some EV13 lineages before they invaded the Italian peninsula. Proto-Italics would have been a predominantly R1B U152 tribe, but also carried a minority of EV13 G2A L140 and J2A1 L70. The second would be the ancient Greeks who heavily colonized southern Italy from the 9th century BCE until the Roman conquest in the 3rd century BCE. The third are the Goths. As a Germanic tribe, they might have carried a small percentage of EV13, but that percentage very, very certainly increased after spending several centuries in Central and Southeast Europe and assimilating Proto-Slavs and Balkanic people before invading Italy. The Goths settled over all the Italian peninsula. They would have brought typically Germanic lineages like I1, R1B, U106. Shout out to U106. I know some brothers that descend from U106. A lot of you guys have that Germanic ancestry as well, even though you don't want to admit it. A lot of you guys are ashamed of it. African Americans I'm speaking about, but that's your history. You understand? We always go to Oh, you don't love yourself. We always go to that phrase, but really, we know who don't love themselves. It's the people that find out their ancestry and want to deny it or try to sweep it under the rug. I'm fine with my EU 290 ancestry. You guys are not fine with your European Germanic ancestry. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. Embrace your fathers, right? Anyway, it says R1B U106, but also the Proto-Slavic R1A CTS 1211, which is now found uniformly in 1 to 2% of the population. Since R1A CTS 1211 is not originally Germanic, it is likely that the Goths also brought a small but noticeable percentage of assimilated lineages from the Balkans, including EV13 and J2B1. I2A1B CTS 10228 would have come later from the East Slavic migrations from Ukraine during the early Middle Ages, hence its absence from Italy, apart from a few coastal areas facing the Adriatic Sea. An Indo-European dispersal of V13 subclades will not only explain why EV13 is present in places like Finland, northwest Russia, or Siberia, where Neolithic farmers had a negligible impact, but also why EV13 is so conspicuously lacking from the Basque country in central Sardinia, the two regions of Europe with the highest Neolithic ancestry. Sardinia is also the only part of Europe where Bronze Age steppe ancestry is virtually absent. The low percentage of EV13 is coastal Sardinia will be better explained by more recent settlements on the island by the Romans or even the Goths, who also settled in Sardinia. The small presence of EV13 in the Near East could be better explained by the extremely long Greek presence in the Eastern Mediterranean from the time of Alexander the Great to the end of the Byzantine domination over the region during the Middle Age. It would be unthinkable that over 1,500 years of Hellenization and Byzantine rule in Anatolia and the Levant didn't leave any genetic trace. In Anatolia, EV13 is found mostly in the western third of the country, the region that used to belong to ancient Greece. The absence of EV13 from central Anatolia does not concord with a diffusion linked to a Neolithic agriculture. There's clearly a radiation from the Greece, where EV13 makes approximately 30% of the paternal lineages, to the East Mediterranean, where the frequency drops to under 5%. So that's the portion here on Wikipedia about EV13. They come from EM78. Which I believe would have been their ancestors would have ultimately still been a part of agriculture, agrarian culture, because they admit in this article that EM78 was a part of that Neolithic expansion. With that being said, we're going to move on, as we just learned that these people may have moved with the Indo-European expansion. They may have been involved with the Romans and the Greeks, which the next article is going to touch on. So we're going to move on to that. Someone requested that we do a video about the Greek expansion or the Greek history or the Greek islands the Greek mainland and the islands around the Aegean. And this is actually going to touch on that. So let's go to the next paper involving that. I want to go specifically, let me close that out, to the portions dealing with EV13. Remember, the video is about EV13, so I don't want to go and read everything else when we're just trying to elucidate the ancestry of EV13. So this is the Greeks in the West genetic signatures of the Hellenic colonization in southern Italy and Sicily. And within this paper, we're going to read the abstract first, which is a summation of the paper. It does a deep dive on EV13, or it touches on EV13. So that's what we're looking for. The Greek colonization of South Italy and Sicily was a defining event in European cultural history. Although the demographic processes and genetic impacts involved have not been systematically investigated, here we combine high-resolution surveys of the variability of the uniparentally inherited Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA and selected samples of putative source and recipient populations with forward-in-time simulations of alternative demographic models to detect signatures of that impact. Using a subset of haplotypes chosen to represent historical sources, we recover a clear signature of Greek ancestry in East Sicily compatible with the settlement from Euboea during the Archaic period, 8th to 5th century BCE. We inferred modern sex bias in the numbers of individuals involved in the colonization. A few thousand breeding men and a few hundred breeding women were the estimated numbers of migrants. Last, we demonstrate that studies aimed at quantifying Hellenic genetic flow by the proportions of specific lineages surviving in present-day populations may be misleading. And we always talk about that. You can't just use modern population as your rubric, as something to give a rubber stamp, because again, modern populations doesn't tell you about ancient ones. The way a modern population does not necessarily depict what an ancient one would look like. Right? We deal with this all the time with sub-Saharan Africa, and David Reich even says it. Modern populations may not represent ancient ones. We went through this, so but a lot of people still lean on that. Oh, modern populations here. Who cares? That tells you zero about ancient populations. You need ancient DNA. That's what you need, and you need enough of those samples to be like, okay, here we go. We know what these populations look like. Right? We know that these clades were there. So from there, we want to go down. I want to start reading the introduction. Yeah, let's read the introduction. Why not? It says here, board a fast ship to Sicily where you could sell them for a profit. That's Homer Odyssey, and he's obviously detailing slavery or some kind of trade here. It says from the 8th century BCE, the Western Mediterranean witnessed a settlement process which originated in the Aegean and had its center of gravity in eastern Sicily and southern Italy, an area later known as the Magna Graecia, or Graecia. A substantial agreement on the drivers of this colonization and the geohistorical dynamics of the settlements is present. But the nature of early settlements, the scale of demographic impact, and its genetic legacy are still debated. Archaeologists, historians, and demographers have proposed different degrees of Greek contribution, with scenarios ranging from a colonization process based on small groups of males moderately admixing with autochthonous groups, like ants or frogs about a pond, to a substantial migration from Greece and a Hellenic origin for a significant part of the pre-Roman Italian population. The pattern of genetic variation observed in Italian populations has been interpreted as either as supporting a substantial Greek contribution to the current Sicilian and southern Italian gene pool, or having been shaped by other demographic processes. When the genetic impact of the Greek colonization has been specifically addressed, a lineage-based interpretive approach was used, relied on the frequency of the more frequent haplogroups, and it lists here EV13 or STR motifs, the Balkan model or modal haplotype. And present-day Greeks. However, these approaches can be strongly misleading. Population patterns might not hold when single nucleotide polymorphism defining finer haplogroup assignments or genotype. Moreover, it is problematic to treat specific lineages or haplotypes as a marker of GC, as these studies have done, because the region where a haplotype is most common today is not necessarily the region where it's originated. So that's what you always got to keep in mind. Just because you see a high prevalence of a certain haplogroup does not mean that that's where those people come from. For example, J1 markers are not autochthonous to Saudi Arabia, but there are a lot of J1 markers there. We know through ancient DNA studies that they actually descend from people from the Caucasus. We know that there are Trans-Caucasus people in origin, right? But you do find a high prevalence today. That just means there are successful lineages, and it produced a progeny that was able to reproduce and become dominant in those regions today. That does not mean if we go 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago, you're going to find them there. All right. Same thing with the Bantu migration. We see Bantus in southern Africa. That's more of a recent thing, right? Where they go down and dominate the sun-related people, so on and so forth. And then they become the dominant lineage. They out-reproduce the autochthonous people of those regions. It's the same concept. You can do the same thing with R1b. R1b is not autochthonous to Western Europe, but today they represent the lion's share of males in Western Europe. Haplogroup O wasn't autochthonous originally to East Asia, China, and Japan, and all those places. There were other groups there prior to them, C, D, prior to haplogroup O, that were dominant before them. But if you look today, O is dominant. So you can't just go off population or density frequency, right? Because that could be misleading. It does not mean they originate there. It just means today they have the dominant or lion's share of males in those regions. It says here the region where a haplotype is most common today is not necessarily the region where it originated. Modern population samples from the hypothesized source region may not be a good proxy for ancestral source populations, and present-day patterns might be related to other events that triggered migration along the same route, most notably the Neolithic agricultural revolution or migratory flows during the Bronze Age, the Classical era, and the Christian era. In addition, previous investigations have not formally tested alternative demographic models to clarify the scale of migration associated with the GC, an issue that has been puzzling demographers for long. And we just read a lot of that on EUpedia about this debate. It says the search and to characterize the genetic echoes of the demographic impact of the colonization process, we applied a hypothesis testing approach consisting of a deep molecular characterization and a male-specific Y chromosome regions, coupled with a dedicated sampling strategy to include relevant source and recipient populations. In addition, extensive simulations aimed at comparing alternative models for the origin and fate of Greek genetic contributions to southern Italy and Sicily were performed. In doing so, we tested for the presence of specific and robust signatures of Greek contribution to Italy and Sicily. Tested alternative models to estimate the most likely scale of the colonization process with a focus on the relative contribution of males versus females, and evaluated the implications of lineage-based approaches in the characterization of past demographic events. All right, now let's get to skip the material methods, but I do want to show you this map. A lot of the places that's going to be talked about. It says a map pointing to the geographic origin of source, recipient, and reference population samples, primary and secondary colonies founded during the archaic age of Hellenic expansions to South Italy and Sicily are also shown in great dots. So you got Greek sources, whatever. You see your boa here. These were just plotted as a Greek colony. Corinthia is a Greek colony. Albania is from another source here. You see Turkey here. So on and so forth. Latina Italy, Ascoli, La Spezia, Italy. We're just saying it's from northern Italy and then central Italy are these sources here. And these black dots are the southern tip of Italy. You see a lot of Greek colonization going on here, which is what the paper is pointing out, the Greek contribution within these populations. And we're going to see something interesting with EV13. You see all these name samples here. But I want to go down and deal with the prize of the hour topic here. For pairs of Y haplogroup and GC ancestry. The assimilations. And I want to go to the results. All right, so the results say here, population relationship, Y haplogroup frequencies are reported in supplementary table S7, while the overall pattern of interpopulation genetic relationships is shown in figure 2. If anybody wants to read this in their entirety, let me go ahead and drop that in the chat. It says interpopulation genetic relationships is shown in figure 2 in supplementary table S10. Cretan, mainland Greek, and Lebanese samples were introduced to widen the spectrum of the historical players acting in southeastern Mediterranean at the time of the Greek contributions as proxies of non-Corinthian Dorian colonizers of South Sicily, since Crete contributed to the foundation of Gela and in turn Akragas. Non-Euboean Ionian colonizers of South Italy and East Italy, and Phoenician settlers in West Sicily, respectively. Looking for the reciprocal positions on the plot, little evidence of these historical events emerges, with the positioning reflecting geography rather than history. Accordingly, we observe higher genetic distance than the expected based on archaeological evidence between putative descendants of source Greeks from Ionia, Corinthians, and Cretan, and recipient Sicilians. For anybody who doesn't know what the word putative means, it's pretty much, let me show you. Let me show you. I don't like sharing my screen like that, like doing it like this. Tab. All right, boom. So the word putative, I used to bust, people's heads in that are like extreme empiricism that deals with materialism or whatever. And so, scientists know. No, actually, scientists don't know. There would be no point in the field of science if we knew every goddamn thing. We're omniscient. Putative simply means this here, and this shows you that scientists don't know. They study. It's a difference. No one knows. No one's omniscient. The word putative means generally considered or reputed to be
putative,
right? So it's a belief. They believe that this had happened, right? It's a belief drawn on evidence, but again, it's still a damn belief. A lot of people try to mysticize you by saying, "Oh, the scientist said this, that, and the third." A lot of it's putative, a lot of it's theory, a lot of it's parsimony, and that's because we don't have time machines. We can only give our understanding from the periphery of history. We don't directly involve ourselves with history. Anyway, let's go back to that paper. It says here, where did we leave off? Accordingly, we observe higher genetic distance from that expected based on archaeological evidence between putative descendants of the source, Greeks from Ionia, Corinthians, and Crete, and recipient Sicilians, groups of the GC, as well as between the putative founders, Lebanese of the Phoenician colonies in western Sicily, Motya, Parnarmos, and Solus in present-day population. Then there's the PCA plat, how you can see Eastern Sicily and Central Italy, they seem to cluster together. And then there's a distance between the Cretians or the Cretans, Ionians, Euboeans, and then you can see all far right the genetic distance between Albania and Thessaly. Signatures of archaic Hellenic contribution to detect genetic signatures of Greek migration in southern Italy and Sicily related compatible with the archaic scenario. We compare fractions of haplotype pairs within the 8 to 12 mutational range, or GCHP, with the same fractions obtained by using Albanian, Croatian, and Turkish samples as reference sources. Let me go down. I want to go straight to the point. In Greek, our chromosome. There's a section here that deals with here it is, lineage-based demographic estimates. This is what I want here. Previous investigations have suggested that the Y chromosome lineage E-V13 is a marker of the Hellenic contributions in the Mediterranean. To test the validity of this approach, we repeated the enrichment test described above by considering only haplotypes belonging to the E-V13 lineage. Given the relatively low frequency of this haplogroup in areas outside the Balkan Peninsula, only the East Sicily sample provided a size of NRY haplotypes, number equaling 20, large enough to perform meaningful comparisons. All the 20 EV13 haplotypes in the sample from East Sicily had matches in the 8 to 12 mutational range when compared to with GC and referencing sources. Accordingly, no enrichment in GCHP was found except versus Turkey. When haplotypes pairs with mismatches of 0 to 7 steps were removed by Croatian and Turkish samples showed an increased relative number of GCHPS with respect to other source samples. 2 in Albanian and Corinthian samples, 1 in the Euboean sample. We further explored the impact of haplotypes belonging to specific lineages by calculating the fraction of GCHPs belonging to the various single nucleotide polymorphism defined lineages contributing to overall enrichment. EV13 is the major contributor for all the sources excluding Croatia. Remember, these were Greek colonized regions, right? The contribution of EV13 in Euboea and Carinthia was much lower than the 3 reference sources. Similarly, we evaluated the contribution of EV13 GCHPS in the F data set. As such, EV13 haplotypes are no longer the major fraction of GCHPS and were underrepresented in Carinthia at 3.4% and Euboea at 1.1%. Clearly show that for these 2 candidate GC sources, the largest coefficient EV13 haplotype pairs did not fall in the 8 to 12, but in the 1 to 4 mutational step interval. Moreover, it demonstrates that only haplotype pairs with Albanian samples reach the highest peak within the 8 to 12 range. And here's the visual aid on those mutational steps between the 8 to 12 and where EV12 falls within that with the different Euboea, Corinthian, Croatia, Albania, and Turkish. Right? It says relative percentage of mutational steps between EV13 haplotypes pairs in source and reference population size. You see the smaller the mutational steps have a greater relevance. And then when you get here to the 8 and 12, they're like in the middle of the ballpark there. So the discussion, evidence of Hellenic genetic echoes in Italy. The history of the European continent has been characterized by a large number of migration and admixture events. The peopling of the Mediterranean is a clear example of this complexity. Hence, not here the use of descriptive approaches aiming at the summarizing the observed genetic variation can easily miss signatures related to a given event. Aware of these limitations, we attempted to recover genetic signals related to Greek colonization in southern Italy by analyzing samples specifically collected to provide information on the source and recipient populations actually involved. None of the Italian population showed a closer affinity with Greek and Greek-related sources when Y chromosome data was analyzed using multi-dimensional scaling analysis. There are many explanations for this: limited historical migration between the two countries, lack of continuity between original and present-day source populations, with current samples not being a good proxy of the ancestral population they come from. The signal of the ancestry could be confounded by more recent or more ancient events. Nevertheless, when we use an approach designed to take into account the mutational process, we recovered a signature of a Greek contribution to Sicily during the Archaic period. A first-level analysis based on the Bayesian posterior distribution of mutational steps compatible with the former colonization phase, GCHPS, showed that the most evident signal was in East Sicily, but this was also found to have parallels or have diffused into neighboring regions of West Sicily and South Italy. Second level analysis performed under more stringent conditions, again detecting a signal in East Sicily. The lack of similar signals in other areas known to have been colonized by Greek migrants, for example, Ionic Italy, can be explained by inadequate source samples, i.e., the Achaia region is not represented in our data set, as well as by either a lower demographic impact or subsequent population discontinuity. We know that many of the pairwise comparisons were not significant due to high background signals from the Albanian sample, this being particularly noticeable when the Corinthian sample was involved. The easiest explanation for this is a close genetic affinity observed among the two areas, deriving from direct and or indirect gene flow. For example, it is known that Greek colonies in present Albanian territories such as Apollonia and Epidaurus were founded by Corinthians, and that the area around Corinth was settled by southern Albanian Orthodox Christians between the 13th and 16th century, the descendants of whom are identified as Arvanites. During the sample collection, attention was given to the issue. Individuals who self-reported as an Arvanite were excluded from the analysis. Nevertheless, some Arvanite ancestry will have been unreported and may have affected the results. Despite the multiple alternative explanations for historical gene flow, it is relevant to stress here that a signature specifically related to Euboea Island in East Sicily was consistently found at different levels of analysis, in line with the historical and archaeological evidences, attesting an extended and numerically important Greek presence in this region. Which this is also, connected to EV13. This is why we're going over this, right? Sex bias gene flow. The numerical dimensions of the migration from Greece that resulted in the establishment of Hellenic colonies have been debated by scholars for centuries. The signal from East Sicily points towards the lower end of the size spectrum proposed by historical demographers, with values in the order of thousands, breeding men and a few hundreds breeding women. From this perspective, our results are then compatible with the hypothesis that the migration and settlement process was driven by males, which is not. This is me talking my commentary, which is not shocking. That's usually what we see in the ancient world. Most migrations are dominated by males. This is why it's very strange when you see mitogenomes of sub-Saharan African descent pre-Holocene or Holocene. It's fair to say, okay, since we see women doing that trick, there's got to be men there too, coming from those same regions. It says, interestingly, this is one of the few cases of sex bias gene flow skewed towards an increased male instead of female contribution. It is obvious that such numbers refer to colonists who arrived in East Sicily as inferred from descendants still living today. It is also worth stressing here that such estimates should not be taken as absolute, but considered as indicative of the scale of the contribution. A possible flaw in these results could be also due to sex differential migratory rate after the first settlement. It is known that patrilocality is a commonplace in continental Italy and Sicily. This may have facilitated the fusion of mtDNA variation at a larger scale than Y chromosome variation, thus lowering the probability of finding local female genetic signatures of the GC. Lineage-based estimations. The genetic contribution of a given source within a defined historical scenario has often been estimated using the number of chromosomes assigned to given haplogroups assumed to have a specific geographic/ethnic origin. In relation to the GC of the Mediterranean, the lineage defined by the E-V13 marker has been used to estimate the Hellenic contribution to the Sicilian gene pool by assuming that all E-V13 chromosomes have a Hellenic origin. Authors estimated a contribution of approximately 37% to the population in Sicily. The reconstruction of an STR-based network linking the Sicilian model haplotype and its one-step neighboring haplotypes, providing a TMRCA of about 2,380 years before present, with a 95% confidence ranging between 675 and 6,940 years ago. More recent contributions and differential origins are expected to affect such estimates, but attempts to mitigate the impact of these phenomena were not implemented. In this study, we highlighted that when alternative sources were taken into consideration, EV13 did not show any specificity as a marker of the Hellenic contribution. The signal that we found using full set of haplotypes within a limited range of mutational distance disappeared when only EV13 unbounded haplotypes are considered, becoming even significant for other non-Greek sources when a filter for recent gene flow was applied. The contribution of EV13 from Carinthia and Euboea, in fact, reaches its peak well before the 8 to 12 mutational steps range. While in this range of samples, it showed minor relative frequency. These findings suggest a poor association between Y haplogroup EV13 and the east to west GC migratory waves. The effects of more recent gene flow of sampling bias may have masked the original EV13 signal from Greece. At any rate, our results caution against the use of specific lineage-based approaches to test for hypothesized population contribution and underline the need for a more targeted approach to explain the occurrence of given haplotypes within a population, providing tests of alternative hypothesis and wide spectrum of reference samples and mutation-limited inference methodology. And that's the paper. I think what will put the end to the debate, because we know EV13 was present there, right? They just want to know how ancient it was and how, the frequency of it. What will put this to bed is the ancient samples. We get more ancient samples to represent EV13, we will know more about it. Just like E1B1A, we need more ancient sampling. We'll know more about it. Most of what we know about E1B1A is pretty much parsimony, right? It's putative. So it's a lot of clays, but we talk a lot about. I'm actually sick of talking about EM2. To be honest with you guys, I'm actually glad that I read this paper tonight. I was able to freshen up the channel with something else than with haplogroup EV13 and its possible connection to the Greek expansion and Greek colonization less than 3,000 years ago, which I do think they did play a role. I think there's enough evidence to show they played a role in the Greek expansion and Roman expansions, the Gothic expansion, so on and so forth. And matter of fact, the last paper we're going to read about the Common Era and how the EV13 can also have something to do with the Slavs, or should I say that for another episode? Yeah, I say that for another one. But there's some more hypothesizing about EV13 and its expansion from the Danube. Great paper on that as well. So I'm gonna bid you guys farewell. Hopefully you learned something from this, man, of our Japanese brothers. that carry the EV13 signature downstream marker EM78, which ultimately comes from E1B1B. I appreciate everybody that came by. I appreciate y'all reaching out. But the next episode, we got some shit we got to speak about. Yap gang in the building. Yap.